I want to say congratulations to all of the winners here today. This is very exciting to see all these projects that we're celebrating and honoring here today. And what I thought we'd do for starters is ask each of you on the stage to introduce yourselves so we know exactly who you are, and just say a few words about your projects. So you have the mic on the end. Let's start with you.
Okay, my name is Dana McKenzie, and I live in Grand Marais, and I work for Cook County, but I also am active in our local cooperative, ISP. It's a community-owned cooperative. And one of the things we've been trying up in Cook County is to get good quality broadband, because we believe it's critically important to our economy and our healthcare and our education system. And we just created a small community video site where our community members can submit their own community created videos where we can all watch them and celebrate and enjoy our community through pictures.
Hi, my name is Corinne Gertzma, and I'm from Redwood Falls. Our project is we're renovating our city park, which is Minnesota's largest municipally owned park. It consists of 217 acres. I am a Friends of the Park board member. We raise money just for improvements because our city has enough for maintenance but not enough for improvements. So right now we're working on a zoo, one of just a handful of zoos in Minnesota, and it's in our park. We have about 4 miles of hiking, walking trails, many bridges and falls, and it is the heart and soul of our community. So I have stories from when I was a kid. I talk to people all the time. They tell me stories about when they were kids, and it was turned over to the city. It was a state park, and it was turned over to the city in 1957, and they have maintained it since then. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Carmen Meyer. I'm with the Wells Historical Society. I'm a board member for them. We reactivated in 2005 because our local railroad company came to the city and said, we either need a new place for a building or we need to demolish the existing depot and put something up there that they could use for a working depot, because obviously the building had deteriorated to the point where it was probably more a pigeon shed than it was a real building. So we started in 2005. It's taken a lot of volunteers, but we now have a solid museum building that we are bringing products, memorabilia in from our community. It's amazing how the people have brought in family heirlooms that reflect the history of our area, and it's just really being exciting getting that going.
Hi, I'm Joan Ellison from Pelican Rapids. Pelican Rapids is a really small community with a huge immigrant population. We have a turkey plant in town. And for the last 13 years, the Pelican Rapids Multicultural Committee has been trying to figure out ways to connect the diverse populations in our community. And the biggest project that we've come up with is an International Friendship Festival. And it's all run by volunteers, and the volunteers come from all the different groups in the community. There's fourth generation Swedes and Norwegians that work on it who are 80 years old, and they're 14-year-old Vietnamese girls, and there's 18-year-old Somali boys, and they all work together and they get to know each other, and through that we hope we're building a really strong, cohesive community.
Great, I have a mic, so you can pass that around. Well, one of the things I love about this community pride competition is that these are times when communities could be sitting around wringing their hands, because I'm sure that in every one of these communities that we have represented on stage and that we also had represented in the competition, I am sure that there are people who are out of work in every one of those communities. I am sure that there are people maybe I'm not quite sure about this, but I think it's likely that there are people who've lost their homes within the last 2-3 years in every one of these communities. And I think it's probably likely that they're in regions where people have lost a fair amount of state aid to local government and that sort of thing. And yet we see this can-do spirit represented in this competition. And I think that's what's so great about it. I'm very interested in your preservation projects. Talk a little bit about how did you get the can-do spirit going. Maybe you can start, Corinne. How did you get this can-do spirit going? Was it an effort or was it there?
You know, the can-do effort was there, and actually our organization, Friends of the Park, came about, I believe it was 30 or 40 years ago, simply because we had people looking to donate money to make improvements to the park, and there was nobody to take this money. And so that's actually where we originated from, and for a long time it was a pretty inactive group. They just had this money, and all of a sudden they decided it's time to start using it. About 5 years ago, they put up new playgrounds in the park, and it got the community's attention, and all of a sudden our little board of 4 people grew to 11 people, is what it is today. And it's amazing the response that we've gotten from people. You know, we keep them going and reminding them that, hey, we got to get this done, and they keep us going saying, hey, we got to get this done. So it's, you know, we're just a group that is making things happen, but it's the community that has made us, or made it possible for us to be in existence. So
how about in Wales?
I think we were all people waiting to get involved in the project. When we heard that that was a possibility, that they would destroy that, we had looked for years for a place to have a museum to store the things that reflected our history clear back to when it was settled. And we didn't have that place, and the depot kind of brought everybody together. And once we settled on a place, the energy was there. It just all came together, and it was amazing. The people from the community that all bonded to say, this is something we want to keep. This is part of our heritage. And it just, I know it was work, but it was really easy work.
Well, that's encouraging.
We were trying to save a community rather than a place. We had people in our community had seen what happens sometimes in meat processing towns, how the town sort of divides up between the new immigrants and the people who've always lived there, and we didn't want that to happen in Pelican Rapids. As our immigrant population kept growing, people said, how can we keep this from happening here? And that's sort of why we began the process, just to keep the community as a good place to live.
I know that broadband takes a fair amount of community resources as well. How about that? How in Cook County, the can-do spirit on this project has been amazing. How did you do that? Did you light the spark somehow?
Like all of these, it took a small handful of motivated, passionate people to get the process rolling. And then as we were able to successfully express our message and our ideas and the thoughts behind what we were trying to do, the momentum built over time. But as you're talking about all these restoration projects and the community and the fair, we're doing the exact same thing, even though we're using a very different tool. We chose for our project using technology as a way, how can we use technology to maintain and build the gluten that sticks our community together? And that's what each one of these projects is doing, and it's neat to hear it, even though something is very old versus something is very new. We're doing the same thing for our communities.
That's an interesting point. That there are some that hold that in tough times communities come together a little bit better than they might other times. Anything to that?
I would say we've seen that because our school district is struggling. Our healthcare facilities are struggling to find ways to stay afloat financially. So because of that, we're, instead of working in our own little silo, we're reaching out and we're looking to each other to find ways to be stronger as a collective group. Yeah, I find that to be true, especially because of the hard economic times. We have this wonderful park in our community. I mean, this 217-acre park is within the city limits of Redwood Falls, and people can't afford to go out of town, and you don't want them to go out of town because, you know, you want them to stay local. They have that option. You know, if they want to go camping, it's right there. You know, it's 5 minutes away. Just take your kids to go look at a zoo, or take them to play on the playground, or, you know, we have all this stuff right there, and it's so nice for everybody to just, you know, jog down there and go do it and go back home, and the next day then go do the same thing. So I definitely see more involvement now because of our current economy. So
I think the one thing I've seen, and it's reflected in our sign over there, is the community pride. When we started that project, it was amazing to me the number of people from our community that eventually wanted to get involved because there is that community pride there.
That's really interesting, because in Pelican, in the 70s, there were Hispanic immigrants, but they were hidden. I mean, they lived in a hacienda that the turkey plant ran, and they ate in the turkey plant cafeteria, and nobody realized there was any diversity. And now people are proud of the diversity in Pelican Rapids. It's something that we're known for. So I think that the pride, I'm not sure that the economics are part of it, but the pride is definitely part of it.
Okay. Well, here at the State Fair, I think is a good venue for the mix of projects that we've seen here, because we, at the Minnesota State Fair, we Minnesotans indulge in quite a lot of nostalgia, I think. But we also, if you visit the exhibits around here, you see so much change reflected in the technology, in cultural amenities, and that kind of thing. And the projects that we have represented here on this stage represent a little bit of both. There's a fair amount of nostalgia, and you've all expressed it fairly well, but there's definitely change. And I'm so interested in Pelican Rapids. I think that all of Greater Minnesota, or at least a good share of Greater Minnesota, is witnessing the demographic change that you've addressed with this project in Pelican Rapids. Can you talk a little bit more about the demographic change as it came to town, and what people, how people responded to it initially, whether there were controversies?
Pelican Rapids is basically a Scandinavian community. The Norwegians came first, and then the Swedes, and then the Germans. And the Hispanics came because there weren't enough employees in our community to run the turkey plant. And so the turkey plant started importing people from South Texas, and they brought their relatives from Mexico. And then in the 80s and the 90s, the churches started sponsoring refugee families from East Asia, and it worked really well in Pelican Rapids. So when Lutheran Social Services set up a refugee resettlement organization, they started settling them in Pelican because it had worked so well in the past. And we have a refugee resettlement office in town, and that helps a lot. But having a lot of refugees in a small, white, rural community can cause lots of problems. I've talked to people who said, well, I drove through town thinking I'd like to live there, and then I saw a black person down the street wearing something on her head, and I thought, oh no, we don't want to live in this kind of place. And he said, I didn't even realize I had thought that until I looked back on why we chose to live somewhere else. So, your original question, is economics important? One of the reasons we're trying to build pride in our community is so that people will think of that as a positive place to live, so that they will see the diversity as a positive. And it's not always seen that way, even within the community. There are people who wish we would go back to the way it was 20 years ago. I think it's richer because of the diversity, and the Friendship Festival just shows that. It shows all the wonderful things we have.
Well, of course, broadband speaks to a change that I think every town in Minnesota is maybe not struggling with, but witnessing somehow. Sometimes I think some people have the impression that all this broadband stuff is coming from professors and techies, and other people I talk to say it's coming from the grassroots. People see a need for this kind of change in Minnesota. Talk a little bit about that, please. In Cook County, where do you see? Is this coming from the grassroots? Do people see the need for broadband?
Yeah, I would say that's when it actually gained momentum, is in the last 3-4 years, when it started to become a grassroots effort, when it started to become the local resort down the road could not do business. They weren't able to issue fishing licenses. They weren't able to book guests, and that it started to affect the economy, which is about as grassroots as you can get in a rural community. And so I would say that the grassroots aspect is more obvious probably to those of us who are actually out in the rural communities than the academics who are maybe saying that that's where it's coming, it's top down. We're seeing it bubble up and go the other direction.
Is broadband an issue in your communities as well?
I don't believe it is.
What's the status of the access to broadband? Do you have it available?
Yes.
Okay.
We've been very lucky, and we have a local telephone company that is providing a lot of our technology needs there. It's been a real gift to us because they have kept us up to date, and it's been great.
Yeah, it makes a big difference in town. We also have a local telephone company that does that, but before they started doing it, you couldn't do anything on the internet. It was just way too slow. And with that, it changes the economic state of the community, like you said. Yeah.
Any high-tech developments associated with your two projects?
Well, I guess the one thing we started out with when our Historical Society began was that we knew we wouldn't have a building available for a number of years, but we wanted to preserve the living histories of the people that live in Wells. So we started recording their experiences as they grew up in southern Minnesota, as they maybe moved into our area as an immigrant, as they came back from wars. We started recording all those things so that at some point we are going to allow access to people over the internet to review those, to see what the history was of our people.
Are you using GPS systems in any way in that new park?
Not yet, but that's been talked about. It is, you can always get out of the trails, but it might take you a while if you keep walking around and around. You know, my husband and I were kind of curious after a recent newspaper article came out just in our local paper about, we have a very unique bridge in our park. It's called the Swayback Bridge, and it's a reverse arc bridge. Instead of the high point being the middle, the high point or the low point is in the middle. So thinking about this, it's very, very unique, and so we had to have FEMA come out and take a look at the bridge because it sustained some damage during the spring flooding. And because it was the only one that they could find like it, it has been placed on the Minnesota Historical Register. And so the Minnesota Historical Society and FEMA are going to be working together to restore this bridge. So we were looking for this article, and when we Googled Redwood Falls, we were finding all sorts of little clips about people in the park. I mean, all over. I think my husband found one from Nebraska, and so yeah, has broadband technology affected the park? I believe it has, because there's a lot more information out there now than what there ever used to be. So.
Great. We have only a couple minutes left. I think I saw Jane holding a sign a few minutes ago. 1 minute left. Is there a quick question from anyone in the audience that we could answer before we wrap it up? Anybody have a question? No? Well, in that case, I'm going to thank all of you and also wish you luck with your projects as they go forward. I know this isn't the end of the projects you represent by any means, that you're very much at the beginning or the middle and not the end of these. And so I'm delighted to hear about the projects here, and I thank you so much for taking the time to share.